Abandon all hope, he who enter here.
What do you get when you mix the story of Dante's Divine Comedy with a hack and slash game like God of War? You get Dante's Inferno. What could have been the next best hack and slash franchise next to God of War, if they were allowed to continue their plans with a sequel. But like a lot of different EA franchises, like Alice and a couple other ones, Visceral Games never got to actually make a sequel to Dante's Inferno like they planned, due to being closed down by EA. And also because of the poor sales of this game. Despite that, it has grown a passionate fan base that wants to see a sequel. The moment we got something very close to Dante's Inferno at the Game Awards, people were ecstatic. Even a franchise like Devil May Cry has borrowed from the Divine Comedy, and people want to see what that sequel would have been. So much that we actually got something from IGN recently that sheds a light on what that could have been. And as a hack and slash fan, I felt obliged to talk about a sequel that could have been with Dante's Inferno 2, Purgatorio. I'll be talking about the first game and where we left off to give you guys some insight, and also talking about the concept art and what things we could have seen from the story of this second game. With this overly long intro aside, let's finally get into the video and delve down into hell and see our sins come to light and face them with the original Dante's Inferno. Now, this obviously takes a lot of inspiration from the original poem, which is a running theme that actually came of the creation of the game, with one of the biggest conceived ideas being it be similar to a playable graphic novel by the head honcho Jonathan Knight, who was a developer at Electronic Arts at the time, even working on the Simpsons movie game, which around that time he would see a movie called 300, which actually partially inspired this idea. Using leftover tech from what they did with the Simpsons games didn't go completely to plan because of EA, and the rest is history. The story of the game follows Dante trying to save his beloved Beatrix from hell, facing his past and also his sins, even fighting Lucifer himself towards the end. The game ends on a bit of a good and also cliffhanger note, setting up an idea of a sequel. With Dante no longer in hell and actually on the path to redemption to make his way to heaven, he is now in the idea of Paradiso. And that's where our second story would begin. Now, from what the IGN article does state, they had a different viewpoint for how they were going to approach the sequel this time around, with the first game's gameplay formula taking a lot of notes from hack and slashes like God of War and also Mortal Kombat with its combat style. They switched things up with this game being heavily inspired by Uncharted 2 and other various games while in development before its cancellation. And going through the article, Joshua Rubin, co-writer of Assassin's Creed 2 and one of the co-writers of the sequel game, gives us a good idea of what we'd be getting. Following the ending of the very first game, Level 1, Part 1 of the story, Dream in Eden would begin in the game on a black screen as you would slowly open your eyes like Dante has been sleeping, as light would blind him to some extent as he would be lying on the grass awakened next to Bellatrix cradling a baby girl. Dante would be confused, but she would tell him that this is their daughter. Dante would ask, "Tell me that this is real." He would say this, but when he looks again, both the baby and also Bellatrix would be gone. They would disappear. And at this point, you would be given control of Dante. You would start to look for Beatrix in the garden as the opening credits would appear on the screen, as you would start to push a button to shout for her, calling her name to prompt a response from her, prompting her to respond in turn as you would follow the sound. And every time you would do this, you would be given a way of following the sound of her voice, but Eden would start to gradually change as you would do so, becoming more dark and moody by the time you actually catch up to Beatrix. It would become uncharacteristically darker and moodier than it was originally. The first in-game boss of the game of the opening level would be a giant snake made of a mysterious black mist, which would capture Beatrix in its grasp, which you would have to rescue her and fight it. Only when you finally get her and rescue her, she's no longer herself. She would look like her queen self from the previous game, corrupted and evil through Lucifer's manipulation, and as such, she would actually speak with Lucifer's voice, saying, "Dante, you are dead." Ground beneath you you in that moment would open up and swallow you into a black chasm. Now, I will say that this opening level is pretty interesting from what is described. It does three things, paying homage to the mysterious cliffhanger ending with the cross that you ripped off turning into a snake, maybe being the boss that you have to fight, and also you being in the Garden of Eden. The bit where you're having to call for Beatrix and follow the sound of her voice was very similar to a bit in God of War 2018 with the Misty Maze with the Atreus section having to go and find him and encountering Freya. Now, level 2 at the shores of Purgatory would be a brief montage as the beginning credits would roll. You would have the original cutscene from the ending of the first game, and eventually we would make our way to the Mountain of Purgatory, which it would be the opposite of hell in aesthetics, but it also would be our version of hell to some extent, making our way from the bottom to the top, where it is a reverse of the first game. The mountain itself is divided into the 9 tiers or terraces of the 7 deadly sins, facing through each ring, pride, sloth, and so on, but with a gate at the cliffside based in the Garden of Eden, which is practically unreachable, where each terrace and level would act as a campaign stage full of combat, puzzles, and so on. Now, back to the story. At the base of the mountain on the beach, Dante would encounter Canto, not that Canto, a Roman centaur, acts as a guardian to Purgatory, who welcomes newly arrived souls, including Beatrix's brother and other souls that Dante has saved in the previous game. Dante tries to follow Francesco, but the guardian would sense him and also stop him from entering. When they inevitably do fight and clash, the red snake from earlier would burst from the guardian's mouth and letting his head open in a very gruesome way, and after that the beach would split open as well, releasing hellfire. Lucifer's voice would echo and burst out.
So it begins.
Lucifer's voice would announce his invasion, which does set up another aspect of what they wanted to do with this game, and that is a war between heaven and hell. Would be introduced to Lucifer's army, and we would also see Michael, the senior of God's archangels, looking down from heaven itself, look upon Lucifer's army, and before sending an army of his own of angels in airships through the clouds of Eden, making their way down the mountain where Dante is caught up in a war between angels and demons on the beach. Dante is going to be attacked from both sides, being attacked by angels and demons, eventually coming face to face with Lilith herself, the first wife of Adam before being seduced by Lucifer, and now she's his second in command and she's practically his right hand. She would serve as your tutorial boss, very similar to Death in the very first game. Your battle would end with Dante taking another scythe, but this time with a bit of a different moveset. Now, I will say, gameplay-wise, you will have some of your returning tools like your cross and other various things. I'll put the article on screen of them describing the gameplay, and I'll give you guys some visual ideas as well. They didn't want the new scythe to feel too different from the one you had in the previous game. They even had developers from the previous God of War game hoping because they wanted to have that similar feel to the Blades of Chaos that they had in the original game with the scythe. They didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so they added on to it, giving Dante a new ability, which is a spiritual ability. And as you play the campaign, you unlock more. The first of many abilities is Spirit Jump, which allows you to jump vast distances. Following that, Dante learns how to take advantage of enemy positions. You also have something to avoid different attacks, and that is Spirit Dodge, along with Spirit Dash, which is very useful in boss fights that allows you to sprout angelic wings. That allows Dante to fly, and to use these other powers, the player must actually fill up the faith gauge to enter spirit mode and actually activate the transformation. Now, enough about combat, let's get back to the story. Lilith would report back to Lucifer saying that things are going according to plan. Another key character would make their first appearance, and that is Dante's guardian angel, Saint Lucia. Now, Devil May Cry fans, not the Lucia you're thinking of, but this one. Very similar to the storyboards that you're seeing on screen. Also, the article does highlight that they did have plans for a DLC for this particular character. Lucia would rescue Dante on one of the airships, actually teaching him how to spirit jump. We get to level 3, Purgatorio. Reaching a safe distance, Lucia would tell Dante to not blame himself for unknowingly helping Lucifer escape hell. This part would have Lucia introduce different new plot points for the entirety of the game. Lucia would reveal that there are larger powers at work than just the invasion, which is part of that, and God would communicate to Lucia and her alone once that ends with Dante defeating Lucifer once and for all. Because of the fact that God does not include Michael in this conversation, the Archangel actually decides to take no chances consequences because of this invasion and close the gates of heaven that link to Eden. This drastic but also necessary and uncomfortable measure not just keep out Lucifer and his demons, but also worthy souls that are trying to get to heaven, like the souls you freed and also Beatrix. Dante has to find Beatrix and get her to Eden before the gates shut, but he wouldn't be doing it alone because Lucia would summon Virgil to show Dante the way up. He would be temporarily freed from limbo to guide you, like he did in the first game through hell. And it would be explained that he too would actually be allowed to go to heaven if you succeed. Now that the goals and stakes have been set up for our new journey, the journey officially begins. The entrance to Purgatory proper is monitored by St. Peter. Would be very similar to a spider because he would use his 8 wings like legs. Ordinary souls are led through, but Dante and Virgil are not. A boss fight that is very epic, big in scope, and extremely exhausting, yet ensues despite Virgil's protest to Dante. The boss fight would end with Dante inevitably killing St. Peter, a crime against the angels that would put them on the angels' radar. Now, level 4 and 5, Pride and Envy, would be the kind of point that sets us into the rhythm of what we're used to. With each terrace, Dante and Virgil would encounter souls. Some of them Dante recognizes from Italy. You would see a massive distinction from the first game, where souls in hell were tortured for punishment. The inhabitants and souls of Purgatory suffer in hope of redemption, similar to Dante. We'd see around the prideful would have to carry around giant boulders on their backs, very similar to the Greek myth, while the envious's punishment is to wander around with their eyes sewn shut, just like in the poem, which is pretty gruesome. And Dante must face these challenges to redeem himself if he's to reach Eden. At the end of each terrace, Dante and Virgil must search for a vision of a cave, which takes you back into a flashback of the past. Very similar to what they did with the cross in the first game. Joshua, the director, does give more insight into these sequences, which you can read on screen. But before Dante and Virgil leave the Terrace of Envy, they are ambushed by Gabriel, one of the archangels, who's confused and pissed off that God actually reached out to Lucia and not him, who hasn't heard from him in eons. He would threaten Dante and Virgil and say, "Let's see him protect you from me," which does initiate a boss fight with Gabriel, and it is a tag team one of Gabriel and his fellow angels. But God does intervene to protect Gabriel from Dante when Gabriel loses the tag team boss fight. There would be a bit of interesting dialogue between Dante and Gabriel at this point, and then you would move on to the next terrace, which is Wrath and Greed, where Dante would finally run into Beatrix and she would greet him with a punch in the face, which obviously is funny as hell, and she's deservedly still pissed about what happened in the previous game. And after talking to her, Dante gets her to agree to come with them because she does want to earn her way into heaven through penance of what she has done, and also learning about the news of Lucifer's army. Next terrace would be a shared vision between Dante and Beatrix, the night that Dante betrayed her by sleeping with another woman, but also revealing the night Beatrix learned of Dante's betrayal. Spitefully agreed to marry Lucifer, Dante would have to face her demon form, vanquishing her for good. And with Lucifer's forces hot on their trail, they would make their way to the next terrace, running into Gabriel again, but this time he offers to help them, flying them where they need to go, but they would be interrupted. And it goes on from there, but I had to stop because there's so much story stuff that they have in this script that I just could not go through it all because of all the amazing things that they were going to probably do. I highly recommend you guys check out the article for yourself and also read the script as well, considering there's a lot of amazing stuff that they were going to do that makes me wish that we could have gotten this as a sequel. And it would have been amazing because at first reading through the script it felt like, oh, we're just going to redo what we did in the original game, but that is not the case. Even though it kind of feels that way from a gameplay point of view, it's not. There are massive switch ups to the formula to make it completely different and more distinct than the original Dante's Inferno, where Purgatory or Paradiso is completely different than Hell. They went with a more cinematic but also less hack and slash type of feel for this game, and yet they still kept what made the original game great and actually added on to it, making it more cinematic and even more story focused, actually adding more verticality to the gameplay approach of this game and also changing up the environments drastically. The fact that they were taking inspiration from the second half of the poem of Dante's Inferno was actually pretty interesting because this feels like a chapter in a 3-part story, and if you read the script for yourself, you'll understand why I say that. And with the angel-based boss fights and also some hell-based ones, this game could have been the next best epic, even better than God of War 3. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down down below. Make sure to like this video if you did enjoy, share it around, and also if you didn't enjoy it and it wasn't for you, change it to a dislike. It's perfectly fine. And also, if you are new to this channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification button to be notified whether I upload. Helps out the channel and me. And make sure to check out some of the other videos on this channel. A good rest of your guys' night, morning, afternoon, or whatever it is for you in the world. Peace out. Bye-bye.